This video is on the correct way to replace the Ford Super Duty 250 gas engine spark plugs. No such thing as diesel spark plug, is there? With aluminum cylinder heads. You know why the threads strip out of these aluminum heads? Because the mechanics doing the job are not competent. Exact same thing as in motorcycles. I've taken out and replaced thousands of motorcycle spark plugs and never one bit of thread damage. This is a Ford spark plug number 1 top, 16 plugs per cylinder, one on top of the head near the intake manifold, one in a traditional location down by the exhaust manifolds. If you want to guarantee cylinder head damage, guaranteed, leave these in for 100,000 miles like Ford recommends. You see, the assholes at Ford are not going to be responsible for the stripped threads. When you leave these spark plugs in, and these first 3 threads here, which were already at 45,000 miles, load up with enough carbon and debris that I had to use a little bit of force to get them out. You let that go to 100,000, and I guarantee there's going to be solid carbon in those threads, and it's going to rip out part of the lead out thread in the cylinder head. Very hard steel versus relatively hard aluminum, but aluminum isn't near the strength of steel. This is an original Ford Motorcraft Platinum CYFS 12 NPG with a submarking of 9K. Electrodes perfectly fine. I've cleaned this up with muriatic acid. There's slight wear on the outer shoulder of the inner electrode. Looks like about a 65 gap, which is what I normally put them at. It's a high energy ignition. 5,000 ohms resistance. The tip was significantly rusted, and that will lead to arcing, which damages the spring up inside the coil on plug, the distributorless ignition system. Get a new spark plug. This one's still plenty serviceable. Why not just clean them and screw them back in? Well, that'll be the end of your engine, because here's what is required, and I absolutely perfected this with the Honda Goldwing 1200s back in the day, back in the 90s. There's the hole, right down here. See the hole? Turn the flashlight now so it's not blinding. There's a spark plug hole right there down inside. It is mandatory to do what Ford says and get an air compressor, 10 or 20 pounds, and a blow-off gun. Absolutely do not take that spark plug out until that hole's blown out. If you have to go buy an air compressor, go do so, because I got a cloud of dust and debris out of there. But there's the hole, and we can look down inside of it, perhaps, and see what it looks like. Here's the hole. See the brown? That's combustion gases that have blown by. The brown down there is combustion gases that have leaked over the years. 2020, and it's 2026, 45,000 miles. But the morons at Ford say, leave them in for 100,000. I'm not that stupid. What is mandatory, absolutely, after blowing the debris out, is to use a 5/8 for this vehicle. Ratchet, 3/8 ratchet, 5/8 deep well socket. Really a good idea to use a rubber protector for the tip, because the last thing you want is to break a spark plug electrode off when it's really difficult to get it out, and you might just want to screw it back in to use it in an emergency. But once the spark plug well, that's called a well, is blown out with compressed air, and wear glasses, and blow out all this area back in here and down along the lower spark plugs with compressed air, then it is absolutely mandatory, with no exception, to use this on a nice long string so nothing can fall in the cylinder. Go to Napa, and get yourself a 1/2 or 5/8 diameter oil passage cleaning brush. It's a spiral brush for cleaning oil passages in engine blocks. This is an engine rebuilding part. And use that with a little bit of Berryman's. Clean a nylon if it's dirty, spray it, wet it with Berryman's, then take it up here and do this with the string out here where this can't possibly fall in the hole and get trapped. Take that down inside the well, down inside the hole. It'll drop way down in and touch the piston. Maybe you can hear it. Scrub those threads clean. If they are not clean, the debris will continue to build up. The new plug is put in, it's going to cut some of that debris off, but in the process, it's a significant risk of starting to damage a thread. And there ain't much thread in there. It's a high power engine. That's evidenced by the long thread. That's for heat, a heat path, but also strength to hold a spark plug in. So, by the way, here's the spark plug wire, which is 4.13 k ohms, and the path from one spark plug terminal to the other reads open circuit to DC resistance. So there must be a capacitor inside, which means that unit is tuned. So let the solvent down in the hole dry. Do not oil. Do not ever put anti-seize on a spark plug thread. That's a stupid mechanics name from 80 years ago, back when everything was cast iron heads and a lot easier to work on. You put anti-seize in there, the heat will drive the liquids off, it'll leave a dry paste and seize the threads up. Anti-seize is a lubricant, and there's nothing here that requires a lubrication. These threads don't move. Spark plug gap, sediment, whatever it was when it came out. But apparently Autolite doesn't have a replacement for this, seeing that these plugs by schedule shouldn't be replaced yet. I'm supposing they're not seeing much call for it. But what you don't want to do is strip off a thread in the cylinder head, because then there's a serious problem of doing what they say is a helicoil, which is an old fix. But it's difficult or impossible to do that without getting aluminum fragments in the cylinder. And get pieces of aluminum down in between the piston and the cylinder wall, and that engine is screwed. So it's going to take a couple of days probably for me to do this first spark plug change, because I'm just starting to feel my way through it. And it looks like it requires taking the inner fender well out for the wheels to reach the lower spark plugs. I can reach number 1 and number 3 fairly easily, but 7's way back in. So this is far more involved than the old school cast iron engine, really loose threads, just screw a plug in and go down the road. The other downside is that this is 2 plugs per cylinder and 2 plugs per individual coil pack. And in between the 2 spark plugs is a cylinder head as a common. It is not ground. There's no engine ground in this system. Its current leaves this terminal, goes through 2 plugs, returns to that one. In the Honda Goldwings, when these threads became contaminated and made a so-called bad ground, again, not ground, common connection between the 2 spark plug shells, but those contaminated threads were literally enough to cause the charging system to shut down. Because when the threads are dirty, and when this is rusted, that causes an open circuit electrically, causes a very high voltage buildup in the coil or coil pack, and that reflects high voltage energy back into the electrical system, and that can actually destroy electronic components. I was starting to have trouble with the ham radio receiver in this truck. I couldn't hear anything because of the ignition static. And sure enough, I took this first one out, and you can still see the crud on top. Just nasty inside. So another reason to change these way before 100,000. So, in summary, absolutely mandatory. Change these They should be changed about 30 or 35,000. I waited a bit long. Never at 100,000, and never put these back in a cylinder, a aluminum cylinder head, or even cast iron without cleaning the threads in the cylinder head, because it's just begging for a disaster. Okay, BYP out. Here on the factory Ford manual, notice, do not remove the spark plugs when the engine is hot or cold soaked. You never see the term cold soaked, but what that means is cold soaked is the opposite of hot soaked, and hot soak is when an engine is running up to temperature and is suddenly shut off. All the piston, connecting rod, cylinder heat has nowhere to go because the cooling is lost. So that grossly overheats the block in the head as the heat's trying to escape. Cold means just the opposite, so to speak, incorrectly. Cold from outside is completely soaked through the engine. What they're saying here is do it on a slightly warm engine, and that means that the deposits on the threads are more likely to be a little softer. Make sure the engine is warm prior to spark plug removal. That's a real problem because there is no way to do all 16 spark plugs at once. If spark plug is dropped, never, ever use it. That can cause pieces to fall off on the cylinder and wreck an engine. Do not ever use air to replace spark plugs. I know a top fuel mechanic that used to use an air gun to remove spark plugs. He was also nuts. Hey Bruno, if you happen to be watching, all spark plugs, install spark plugs to 18 pound-feet, 24 Newton meter. Use a torque wrench. These are the most delicate, most critical fasteners in the vehicle. You can get away with stripping one lug nut and still drive. Strip one spark plug thread and you're what's called screwed. And this is showing the electrical connector on the individual coil pack. There's a tab on top that pushes down, clicks, and then push down again. It just pulls off. Don't try to force it. And one last note, the spark plug's internal resistance, the first one measured 4.94 k ohms, so 5,000 ohms, which incidentally is the same resistance as the wire. And last but not least, I checked the outboard spark plug on the exhaust side down there. That is a significantly different spark plug, and taking one of them out showed the reason why. The inboard plug is CYFS 12NPG, which is 4.94 kilo ohms resistance, and a standard large center electrode. The outboard plug is a CYFS 12, 8.51 k ohms, with the spark plug cable about 4.5 k. So we assume that's the correct total resistance. 5k plus 5 is 10, plus this 9 is 19k. There's a performance increase by matching that resistance to the coil. Unfortunately, I can't read through the coil to see what it's supposed to be. But this outboard plug came out extremely oil fouled. Fresh oil deposits. Somebody online had commented that's from overfilling the crankcase, and I believe every word of it, because there's a PCV inlet up here on top of the throttle body, and that's probably throwing oil in and favoring maybe cylinders 1 and 2. So especially if the plugs are dirty, the threads in the cylinder are contaminated, here's what absolutely must be done. Absolutely critical when untorquing a spark plug. Not only, like Ford says, don't use air, but taking out the first time, unscrew it about a turn to 2 turns. If it feels like it's dragging, screw it back in. Back out a little bit, back in just a couple threads. That'll knock debris off the end of the plug. Maybe unscrew it a turn and a half, back in, 2 turns back in, 3 turns back in. After the 3rd turn on these Ford plugs, all the spark plug threads will be up inside the threads in the cylinder head, and that won't work anymore. But it should unscrew fairly smoothly then. Once out, clean very thoroughly. I use muriatic acid to clean the electrodes in the porcelain. Of course, that's got to be careful with that acid. It's acid. Clean spark plug threads with this. The spark plug came out with a coat of oil, brown oil, over all the threads. So there's some oil in the cylinder. Last time I ran it, I didn't get it good and hot. But somebody online said it's because the crankcase is overfilled, and that's very likely. There's going to be oil vapors brought up in the intake anyway, just because of the PCV system. So when putting the spark plug in, this is absolutely mandatory. I damaged one spark plug thread in the head on my 95 S10 because I didn't do this. Never, ever put a spark plug in this rigid 5/8 socket with an extension. Never put the spark plug in there, put that in the hole and try to start it, because that causes damage to the lead-in of the threads in the cylinder head unless it drops in exactly straight. And the chance of you reaching in there in a blind spot and putting that in dead straight and rotating it right square on so the thread lead-ins don't hit each other at a funny angle is about zero. It's mandatory to use a piece of about 3/8 hose. Fuel line did not work because fuel line was not straight. This needs to be very straight. I got an old washer hose and cut a section out. Put the spark plug up inside the hose so it's nice and straight and can't fall out, because if it falls out and hits the concrete, it's a bad plug. But then with the spark plug on the end of that hose, set that in and reach back here and turn it. And what that does, that allows flexibility for those two threads to start lining each other up. And at any time you feel resistance, stop and back it off. If it doesn't feel like it's going, set it in as close as you can get it, and then turn it backwards. And sometimes that will cause the thread lead-ins to flip over each other backwards and drop into alignment. So just very gently push in and turn it backwards. This will save damage to the cylinder head. Once that thread lead-in is damaged, it's damaged forever, because a spark plug tap will not clean out the thread lead-in. So avoid permanent damage to the cylinder head, which makes replacements in the future a problem. And I've got that problem every time I work on the S10 now, just on one cylinder, because I made a mistake of using this rigid thing to try to put that in, and it's the far back number 7 on the driver's side where it's hard to reach. Don't use this Mickey Mouse thing up inside here. It's more likely to be left stuck on the spark plug, then you got to try to get it out back in that hollow, that blind recess. But set this over very gently and never do any of that, so it can damage the spark plug porcelain. So that's how to put them in. Absolutely mandatory. Torque wrench, not by fingers. The most critical, easy to damage threads in the vehicle. One of them is damaged, the vehicle's screwed. So get a torque wrench. If you can't afford $100 for a decent torque wrench, get rid of the $50,000 vehicle. So there's the whole story on the spark plugs.